Hello everyone, my name is Lucas Teixeira, and today I will be presenting about the Latin American revolutions. We'll explore how these revolutions started, who led them, and how they shaped modern Latin America. Before the Latin American revolutions, the region was controlled by Spain and Portugal. Society was divided into rigid classes: Europeans at the top, Creoles below them, and indigenous and African people at the bottom. The economy mostly benefited Europe throughout resource extraction like silver and crops, but the Enlightenment brought new ideas, freedom, equality, and self-government that inspired people to challenge colonial power. The American and French revolutions played huge roles in inspiring Latin Americans. The American Revolution showed that colons could gain independence, while the French Revolution spread ideas like equality and the rights of man. These movements motivated Creoles and mestizos to question colonial hierarchies and fight for self-rule. One of the first upswings was the Mexican War of Independence, which began in the year 1810 with Father Miguel Hidalgo's famous Grito de Dolores. In the north, Simon Bolivar led campaigns that threatened Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. Meanwhile, in the south, José de Martín led Argentina, Chile, and Peru to independence. Together, they helped end Spanish control across almost all the Latin America. Important moments include St. Martin's Cross of the Andes in 1817, a huge military challenge that led to Chile's freedom after the Battle of Maipú in 1818. In Mexico, the Plan de Ayala of 1821 united royalists and revolutionaries, ending in Spanish rule. These victories marked the birth of new independent nations. Some of the main leaders include Simón Bolívar, known as El Libertador, who dreamed of a united Latin America; José de San Martín, who coordinated southern campaigns and helped liberate Chile and Peru; Miguel Hidalgo, a priest who began the Mexican fight for independence. This map shows how independence movements spread across Latin America between 1810 and 1825. You can see how Spanish control slowly shrank as revolutionary forces advanced from Mexico and South America. I'd like to share a few quotes that really reflect the spirit of the time. Simón Bolívar said, "When tyranny becomes law, rebellion is a right." Father Hidalgo said, "Action must be taken at once. There's no time to be lost." These words show how urgent and passionate their struggles for freedom were. After independence, Latin America went through big transitions. Countries like Venezuela and Argentina became republics throughout the struggle with internal divisions. Brazil became an empire under Dom Pedro I, staying monarchy but independent. While these revolutions brought political freedom, they didn't erase inequality or the hierarchies often remained. Globally, the revolutions were seen as nationalist movements against colonial empires. However, in really, slavery and racial inequality persisted. Although emancipation was promised, most indigenous and African people continued facing discrimination even after independence. These revolutions didn't just change Latin America, they helped spread Enlightenment ideas worldwide. They showed that people could challenge imperial powers and fight for rights, democracy, and equality. They became examples for other colonies seeking independence. The success of these revolutions encouraged others around the world to demand freedom and justice. From Europe to Africa and the Middle East, they showed that ordinary people could build nations based on equality and popular sovereignty. The Latin American revolutions broke colonial rule and created new nations, but many social problems remain. Power stayed with the Criollos while indigenous and black people were denied, still after the independence. Lessons we can learn. These revolutions teach us that freedom takes effort, unity, and courage. They show that winning independence is only the first step. Achieving equality and justice is a longer journey. Leaders like Bolivar and San Martin remind us how individuals can inspire entire societies to stand up for their rights. Even today, the revolutions influence Latin America. Countries still face challenges like inequality and corruption, but the revolutionary spirit continues to inspire movements for human rights, democracy, and social justice. The conclusion is the Latin American revolutions transformed the region and inspired freedom around the world. As a Brazilian, I see how their legacy still shapes our countries today, both the pride of independence and the unfinished work toward equality. These revolutions remind us that liberty and justice requires constantly effort. We have the sources in all the slides, but this one is all of them. The main sources were Britannica, History Guide, and Tutor Chase. We provided the main sources of this research. Thank you very much for watching.